I'm showing straight up 10 o'clock right now, so I think we'll get started. Welcome everyone who has joined us this morning for this meeting on the Federal CARES Act. I know that this is something that we're all very interested in learning more about, and for my part, I really appreciate having access to the resources of the U.S. Chamber, because I know that this information is accurate and up to date, and that more than anything is what we need right now. So we're very fortunate to have John Kirchner from the Midwest region of the U.S. Chamber. And he is going to take us through this. And also from our office, in addition to me, Robin Anderson, we have Colleen Frein, who is going to help to manage the technical aspects of this call. And we'll also probably, Colleen and I will both be asking John questions on your behalf during the question and answer period. So with that, John, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Robin. Glad to be here today. We're going to walk through kind of the Federal CARES Act, Phase 3, talk a little bit about what happened in Phase 2, and give you a little bit of an overview in terms of what's available for relief for primarily small businesses, but certainly all businesses. I will do my best to answer every question I can, but I also don't want to be in a position of giving you bad or incorrect information. So if I don't know, I'll simply say, I don't know, and I'll get the answer back to Robin. So with that, we'll just kind of roll through this here really quickly. Major overviews here. So just to give you an idea of the scale here, this is a $2 trillion package. It's just under 10% of our regular GDP for our country. And what this package is it's designed to be robust, because the idea is that this is the bridge that helps us avoid a prolonged recession and downturn, and allows us to kind of, once regular commerce to begin, we can move back to normal pretty quickly. In addition to the $2 trillion in face value of the package, there is more. The Federal Reserve can provide some leverage on that money, and an additional $4 trillion to support the economy. So some of the tools and tricks the Federal Reserve has, and so it's $2 trillion they spent, but it has the options of $4 trillion in support of the economy. What we've seen a lot in the news is the automatic payments for individual taxpayers, $1,200 per individual, $2,400 for a joint return, and $500 per child. And that's going to be phased out for incomes above $75,000 individual or $150,000 joint. So those checks should be rolling out here pretty quickly, or direct deposits. You know, they're talking in the next couple of weeks of having those out, so we'll probably be seeing those coming. We already know that obviously saw last week that over 3 million initial unemployment claims, and much of that we have to support business, obviously is supporting business in terms of those expanded unemployment claims. What they've done is most of the restrictions on eligibility have been suspended if it's related specifically to COVID-19. And an additional $600 per week on top of the regular state benefit is available through July 31st. And that's the federal government's providing that. And all your state has to do is accept those funds for the additional $600. Eligibility for this ends when an individual can return to work. So if you lay somebody off as a result of COVID-19, the moment you call them back, or the moment you're back up and operating, those benefits no longer are available, and those benefits are provided through your state unemployment insurance offices. A lot of questions have come up about whether or not individuals remain on unemployment, particularly given the enhanced benefit. There was some concern that with the extra $600 that people are getting paid more to be unemployed than they are to be employed. That benefit ends, again, the second that they are eligible to return to work. So that concern was addressed. Other major provisions for employers. We've really broken them down into three groups here. The provisions that are available to all employers, those that are available for larger employers, and then small businesses, the self-employed, independent contractors, nonprofits, et cetera, et cetera. And we're going to spend the bulk of our time today talking about that because that's the vast majority of what this bill is focused on. So for all employers.
You just want to make sure we're not seeing your slides on the screen.
Oh, you're not?
We're seeing you.
You're just seeing me. Okay, well, what, yeah, why don't I stop sharing? Do you want to, I'll stop it, and then if you want to put it up, you can do it from your end.
Because I'm seeing his slides, seeing him.
Robin, I'm seeing his slides.
I see the slides.
Okay.
Okay, we have a few comments that they weren't seeing slides. So
Okay, well, if we just want to go to the all employer slide,
okay.
which is maybe the third one.
Not too far. All right, how does that look?
Perfect. So the first,
There we go.
Everyone good to go here. The first provision here available to all employers is the payroll tax provision for all employers who pay payroll taxes. A lot of P's in there. So think about it this way: everyone who's writing a check to their employees, after you write that check, you're normally writing another check to the federal government, covering all the payroll taxes for both the employee and the employer side. Under this bill, an employer may choose to delay their payment of their portion of the payroll taxes, which is 6.2% of Social Security wages. They can delay paying that between now and January 1, 2021. So this isn't a tax cut, a payroll tax cut. What this is simply is an effort to delay those payments to provide some liquidity for businesses to kind of keep people employed. If they choose to delay, then they have to pay 50% of those payroll taxes that they would have owed by December 31st, 2021, and the remaining 50% on December 31st, 2022. So again, this is a way to provide some liquidity to keep people employed and to keep the business open. The important caveat here is this is generally available to all employers, except if you had a loan forgiven under the Paycheck Protection Program. That's a small business loan that we'll talk about a little bit later. But if you have a loan forgiven under the Paycheck Protection Program, the delaying of payroll taxes is not available to you. And we'll get into that here in a little bit. Other tax changes that are important, net operating losses. If you have a business that it has an operating loss and you want to be able to use that against prior taxes paid, now operating losses are expanded from 2018, 2019, and 2020, and generally can be carried back 5 years. Also, this also applies to pass-through sole proprietors. And if you're a business, this is primarily for corporations that have AMT credits. You can accelerate the recovery of those as well. Moving on, interest deductibility. Also have the opportunity for all employers to increase your interest deductibility for 2019 and 2020. And importantly, for restaurants and retail establishments who in the past couple of years who have made investments in their properties, they can accelerate the recovery of that. All of these provisions are really centered on one idea, which is improving liquidity for employers. I talked about that a little bit earlier. At the moment, when employers have no revenue coming in, it's really hard to pay the bills. So all these provisions are giving employers greater access to liquidity so that they can pay the bills and try to stay open. Again, it's not about kind of reducing overall taxes. It's providing short-term liquidity and paying those taxes and delaying them a little bit later. I think that's that. I think we can move on to the next slide here. The employee retention credit. This is another provision that's available to all employers. Now, this was a late addition to the bill. The early draft did not include this provision. So as a result, there hasn't been a lot of attention paid to it as much as some of the other things. This retention credit generally applies to all employers. We're talking about businesses, but this also includes nonprofits, for example, who are fully or partially shut down as a result of the coronavirus, or have a 50% drop in their gross receipts in a quarter. And they're eligible for this until their gross receipts get back up to 80% of the prior, for the prior year amount. So think about this. This is designed to help employers who've shut down or lost revenue, but who continue to pay their employees. The tax credit, how much is it worth? It's worth 50% of the wages paid by the employer up to $10,000 per employee. And that's a fully refundable tax credit. So think about this as a $5,000 tax credit available to the employer. There are some special rules for employers over 100, with 100 employees and employers with less than 100 employees. So if you have more than 100 employees, the benefit only applies to those employees who you are paying but who are not providing services. So if there's some people who can't work from home but you're still paying them, they're not able to do their job, it applies to them specifically. If you have 100 employees or less, the requirement that they not be providing services does not apply. So it's available to all employees you paid during the eligible period. Importantly, again here, the Paycheck Protection Program that we're going to talk about, that this is a small business loan grant program. And if you receive one of those loans, because it can be converted into a grant, you cannot take advantage of the employee retention credit. So similar to the one I talked about earlier, if you take advantage of the Paycheck Protection Program, you can't take advantage of this as well. So important distinction. So next slide, we'll talk about small and mid-size and larger employers rather. This bill in total included $500 billion to the Treasury Department to support loans, loan guarantees, and Federal Reserve credit facilities. The Federal Reserve credit facilities, you may have read about them in the paper. These are the things the Federal Reserve is creating, and for example, to support commercial paper, money market funds, they do these as a regular course of business when we have a financial crisis, and they were used robustly, for example, in 2008. 454 billion of the 500 is directly for businesses at large. There are special programs for the airline industry and critical national security businesses that make up the remainder of the 454 to the 500. We expect more guidance on these Federal Reserve credit facilities here in the coming weeks. We haven't seen that yet, but there are some restrictions to go along with this exchange. So when you talk about the big businesses, there are the restrictions in exchange for accepting the benefit, which could include stock buybacks by the company as long as their loans are pending and for an additional year, and limits on increasing executive compensation. So if some of these larger employers take advantage of these programs, there are some limitations on that, such as executive compensation, stock buybacks. So we'll go to the next slide. This is probably where we'll spend most of our time here talking about small businesses. So the Paycheck Protection Program, this is available to small businesses who are generally under the size of 500 employees, 501c3 nonprofits, self-employed independent contractors, etc. So generally who we think of as a small business or a small employer. They have loans are available to them equal to the lesser amount of 2.5 months of average payroll or $10 million. So that's how much money is available to you. These loans are going to be done by local and national lenders. This program is unlike another program we'll talk about later, which is run through the SBA. This is going to be run directly through your local and national lenders who are going to be doing this. And the government's basically going to be giving them money and they're going to be giving it right out the door to you. There are very minimal requirements for these loans, no collateral, no personal guarantee. What's interesting about these loans is that they convert to grants equal to the amount spent on payroll, rent, interest on mortgage, utilities for the 8 weeks after origination. So if you qualify for a $10 million loan, that can be transitioned into a grant and forgiven for every dollar you've spent on payroll, rent, interest on mortgage, in utilities for 8 weeks after the origination. So if you have $10 million and you spend $8 million on those items, that $8 million is going to turn into a grant instead of a loan, and you're going to have a loan carrying on the remaining 2. So it's important to know this again is an effort to provide some liquidity and encourage businesses to keep their employees on the payroll and working. An important caveat is loan forgiveness, so that transition to a grant, is reduced if the employer reduces wages by more than 25%. So if you reduce wages, this includes laying people off, some of that loan forgiveness is reduced, right? So again, this is designed to keep people working at their current wages as much as we can. Now, if you do have to lay people off or reduce your wages, you can avoid the reduction in forgiveness if you bring the employees back and return them to their original wage within 30 days and maintain through June 30. So if you, either before this bill came out or if today you laid employees off, you have 30 days and you apply for this program, you have 30 days to bring them back onto their previous employment level, and you have to maintain that through June 30th. So the focus of this bill is largely driven to the end of June, and people say, what about July 1st? This is really focused on June 30. I think there was a short-term belief that hopefully much of this will be behind us by June 30 and the economy will be opening again. And if that doesn't happen, then there will be a phase 4 bill potentially that addresses some of that. So that is important to know as well. Next slide. If you want to learn more about the Paycheck Protection Program, go to uschamber.com/SB loans. We have a checklist that that'll answer a lot of your questions. How do I qualify? Where do I go? What do I need to do? What are the different parameters? That's a tremendous important asset that you have available that I'd encourage you to check that out before you visit your lender and might answer a lot of the questions ahead of time for you. All right, next we're on the EIDL loans. Okay, so EIDL loans aren't different. These are economic injury disaster loans. So I'm sure many of you, if you've ever had a flood or a tornado, or it's popular to be used for those kinds of disasters. So they're not new. It's just kind of a different expansion of it, and for COVID-19. So this is available to small businesses, self-employed, independent contractors, and all nonprofits. So this would include a Chamber of Commerce and 501c6s, whereas the previous one, the PPP loans, were about C3s. But this is for small business and nonprofit, including faith-based. If you have faith-based members, it's important to note for them, with fewer than 500 employees. And what's available here is up to $2 million working capital loan, up to 30 years at the rate 3.75 to 2.75 for nonprofits. Payments can be deferred up to 1 year. Loans are based on credit scores, so no tax returns are required. You can get up to a $200,000 loan without a personal guarantee. No collateral for $25,000 or less, and general security interest instead of real estate loans. What's also interesting part of this program, unrelated to the loans, is there is a $10,000 emergency grant that's sent out within 3 days that does not have to be repaid. So you can go in right now and apply for this $10,000 emergency grant, and within 3 days get this grant. Even if you don't qualify for the loan, you get to keep the grant money. Now, $10,000, this is directed for short-term emergency. Obviously, it's not going to keep a business open for a long time, but that is available to all small businesses, self-employed, independent contractors, nonprofits, etc. This does interact with the Paycheck Protection Program, so you can avail yourself to both programs. Obviously, depending on how big your business is, but if you're a small business, typically there's more, you can get up to $2 million working capital here, up to $10 million in the Paycheck Protection Program. You can use both programs. The challenge is you can't spend the money on the same thing for both programs. And if you think of the Paycheck Protection, There's loan forgiveness that's available if you're spending it, again, on mortgage, on payroll, on rent, and things of that nature. If you have an idle loan and you're paying for payroll, mortgage, rent with the idle loan, you're not going to qualify for the forgiveness in the PPP, right? So if you're going to apply for both, you need to kind of have that conversation with your lender or your accountant and the SBA in terms of how are you going to use that money, because you kind of can't double dip, so to speak, to use it for the same purposes. So whereas the PPP loans were being administered through local and national lenders, and there was talk in terms of those of Mnuchin saying, I want you to be able to come in at 8 o'clock in the morning, apply for a loan, and by 5 o'clock at night have your money. I don't know if it's going to be that swift, but that's going to be run through the lenders, right? So they're going to have their own kind of swift process. This is different. This is run through the SBA, and you have to apply for the EIDL loans and the grants through sba.gov. And I know some people haven't had a lot of success with SBA in different times in the past, but that's who's administering it this, and we're still waiting for some guidance from them in terms of how this is going to work. And I know there's some frustrations out there, and we're continuing to push information out and make it available. But that is kind of the big difference here. Additional big difference is not, this isn't being run through your local lenders. This is being run through the SBA. So we can move on to the next slide. Paid sick leave. Yeah.
John, could you go back to the EIDL
Yeah.
slide, please? I think it's important to note, and maybe you could confirm this, that if somebody has applied for an EIDL loan prior to the CARES Act being enacted, they need to reapply for this loan if they want the $10,000 emergency grant.
Right. Yeah. So EIDL loans, you're right, existed before. They're not new like the Paycheck protection. They've always existed. So someone might have said, I'm gonna avail myself to the EIDL loan, but that $10,000 emergency grant is new. So if they want that, they have to come in and reapply for that. That's not going to be just automatically given to them. Paid sick leave. So this is from the Phase 2 bill. Phase 3 bill is very much focused on business and providing liquidity and opportunity for businesses to stay open and keep people employed. The Phase 2 bill, which came first, was much more focused on employees and making them available to more paid leave. So just some of the paid leave elements from Phase 2 bill. Employers with less than 500 employees are required to provide 10 days of paid leave if the leave is related to COVID-19. Sick leave can be taken when you're ill, quarantined due to exposure, or to take care of a sick or quarantined family member, or to take care of a child during a school closure. So it's much more focused on the family and less on you're sick, you get paid leave. If you have to care for someone or have a kid, and I think we all do now at home, this applies there. Your paid leave is paid at the regular rate with a maximum of $511 per day if you're taking care of yourself. And it's paid at 2/3 the rate with a maximum of $200 per day if you're caring for a family member. Payment up to the maximum is reimbursed by the federal government. And this leave is in addition to any other leave the employer already provides. So this isn't in place of, this is in addition to your existing paid leave programs. This is with 50 employees may exempt from providing leave related to caring for a child whose school or daycare is closed if providing leave threatens the viability of the business. So this means if your position is critical to the viability of the business, small employers of less than 50 may be exempt from having to pay you leave to take care of a kid if their school is closed. And the paid sick leave is also not available if an employee can telework. So if you can work from home, this does not apply. The other one here that came through this was the paid FMLA expansion. For those who are not familiar with this is the Family Medical Leave Act. It's a law that generally allows for 12 weeks of unpaid leave. What the Phase 2 bill did was say that with employers with less than 500 employees, they are required to provide up to 10 weeks of paid family leave if the employee needs to take care of a child due to a school closure but caused by coronavirus. And that's the only reason to have extended leave. When you think about the interaction between this and the sick leave, an employee would take 10 days of sick leave first and then would be eligible up to 10 weeks of paid leave under the FMLA. Here leave is paid at 2/3 the regular rate again, maximum of $200 per day, $10,000 in aggregate. It's in addition to what you already provide under state and local law. Again, it's fully reimbursed in the same way by the federal government. And there are similar exemptions for employers with fewer than 50 employees, same as the paid sick leave that we talked about earlier. And it doesn't employ to an employee who can telework. And the next slide, finally, how can you get more information on this? uschamber.com if you haven't gone there. There are a tremendous amount of resources available in terms of like the checklist I mentioned earlier, small business loans, but also just things for businesses, communications tools, working from home kind of tools. And then specifically for small businesses, uschamber.com/co has a plethora of resources available there as well. And I know we've sent a lot to Robin, and I'm sure Robin has sent a lot of those out to you as well. But there's a lot of information there that I would avail yourself to before you decide to, pursue which EIDL loan, PPP loan, whatever it might be. So with that, Robin, I think you might have some questions possibly.
Sorry, had to unmute. So first of all, our understanding is that the Paycheck Protection Program applications are going to be available this Friday, the day after tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that businesses should be doing to prepare for that? I thought I saw a link from the U.S. Chamber that they had a sample application up.
I think there might have been one sent. I'd have to look. I think I might have seen one that went out that maybe came from the White House, but I think there is a sample application out there. I can track that down and get that to you if it does exist.
And so most of our North Iowa lenders are SBA 7A lenders already. So they are automatically then designated by as a lender for aren't 7A lenders are having a little difficulty being qualified through the SBA. Is there a link or something that can help them?
I am unaware of one. I will look. I know they
hard.
were going to create a process to facilitate approval for them pretty quickly. But I think they are just swamped with probably trying to get the program out to their existing lenders. My understanding is they're trying to get it out to their existing approved lenders. And at that point, they're going to start the process of how do you approve more lenders.
I have a question about the PPP.
Sure, go ahead.
Could you say that again?
I have a question, a few questions about the PPP.
Yeah.
So the application has not come out until Friday, so we can't apply for this yet.
Right.
And do you physically go into your own bank and apply, or do you fill the application in, it goes into some federal place, and then that gets sent to the bank that we're working with?
My understanding is you will deal directly with your lender, with your bank, that the SBA is taken out of their SBA approved banks, but this process does not go. Though the application isn't available, I'm sure they are preparing for this as well because they're going to be pumping a lot of money through this program.
Right. Okay. And from what I read, the 250% is based on the payroll for the 2019 pay year. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe so. And there is on that SBA, that link I showed you, uschamber.com/SB loans, there is a calculator in there to figure out what that is, to kind of there to show you the math on what that is specifically.
Okay, and then my last question is, I was a little confused about, they were saying the amount of the payroll is not the gross, or not, doesn't include payroll taxes. So is it the net check that went out, or the payroll, the gross wages?
I've got that here. It was the 2.5 times. It did include, I know it included healthcare costs. So there's a formula to calculate average monthly payroll, and once it's calculated, you multiply. So it does include healthcare costs, but I'm not sure if it includes payroll taxes and that.
Maybe it includes the employees' payroll taxes, but not the employers.
Not the employers. And that calculator is on that SBA link I had, uschamber.com/SB loans.
Okay. All right. I think that's all I have. Thanks.
Well, and one thing to remember is that since most of the banks are also have people working from home and various situations, rather than going to your bank, why don't you call or email your banker to get the process started?
Yeah, and I would say, I'm looking at it right here, on that payroll, there is an important distinction on figuring out your payroll too. So if you have an employee that makes over $100,000, you can count up to $100,000 on that. So if you have an employee who makes $150,000, only $100,000 of that is included. The other, anything over that is excluded. So that's important to note. Payroll taxes and income taxes are excluded as well. So that was a good point. And if you have an employee whose principal place of residence is outside of the United States, so if they live somewhere else, that would not be included. And then qualified sick leave wages, there's a component of that as well that's excluded. But the payroll taxes are excluded, plus the important distinction I should have mentioned earlier is that threshold of $100,000 in terms of what's included.
And I'm sorry, you were reading that off of the calculator,
Yep, that link, uschamber.com/SB loans.
I'm sorry, uschamber.com/SB loans.
/SB loans, yep.
Okay. All right.
I think you're muted, Robin.
Thank you. So hard to mute and unmute. For everyone's information, we did send out the U.S. Chamber Guidebook to everyone yesterday by email, and we also have that available on our website. And if you want a copy of that, just let us know and we'll make sure to get that out again. It's a very good resource.
I have a question. So as an LLC with no employees, when you're doing the economic injury disaster loan application, what do you list as the number of employees? Is it 0, or do I count myself as 1?
I don't know. I can track that down for the self-employed 1 employee. I don't know if that answer is 1 or 0. I'll track that down.
If there aren't any other questions, we'd certainly like to thank John for the time today and thank all of you.
Could I
And in the we're going to get through this together and get our.
Robin, we have,
Okay, we have a question. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Colleen.
I was going to say, we have a question from Amber about the $600 extra on unemployment.
Yeah. So what that is if you are unemployed specifically related to COVID-19, your business is shut down, you're laid off, you get sick, you have, for whatever reason, if you are unemployed specifically related to COVID-19, you would get your regular state benefits that you would get for unemployment. And on top of that, the federal government is adding an additional $600. So, and that benefit exists until you are employable again. So until the point where your employer opens up his doors again and says, come back to work, or in case, or they get their loans or whatever is work to bring back. The second you are eligible to be employed, those benefits cease to exist. And the only thing, your state just needs to accept that benefit from the federal government. I'm unaware of a state who hasn't done that.
And Amber is also just curious, even if this is more than their current wage, they still got that extra $600?
Yes, and that was yes, they do. And that was the concern as this bill was being drafted by some of the Republicans in the Senate, which is there was a belief that this would be a disincentive for people to return to work because they're all of a sudden getting paid more than they do on their job. But then they put in that requirement that the second that you are employable again, that benefit, that $600 goes away.
And from Dawn, when does that extra unemployment actually take effect?
As soon as you apply. As soon as you apply with your state office, so long as it's related to COVID-19, then it takes effect. But if you were previously unemployed before this happened, or if your unemployment is not related to COVID-19, you're not eligible for that $600. So it doesn't apply to someone who was already unemployed or recently unemployed for a different reason.
I have another question about the PPP.
Yeah.
I heard I know there's not double dipping between. I thought there were three things. So PPP, the EIDL loans, and then what would the third one be? Just a regular SBA loan?
Well, the SBA loan is the EIDL loan.
Okay.
Or the EIDL loans run through the SBA. There is that emergency $10,000 emergency grant that's part of the EIDL loan. But the two big loan programs were the EIDL loan and the PPP.
Okay, I thought there was a third one, but they're just two.
Those are the two big ones. Yep.
Well, and the payroll tax.
Yes, there's the payroll. Yeah, there is those payroll tax, and then the employee retention credits that I talked about earlier. But if you avail yourself to the PPP, you can't defer your payroll tax. You're not eligible for the employee retention credit.
That was the third thing then. Okay. Yeah.
I'm a CPA in town here, and I have worked closely with a couple banks already talking about this. And one of the things that I wanted to stress and point out is these lenders are going to be just flooded with these applications. So what the lenders are telling me is get as much of the documentation prepared ahead of time. Please don't go in there and ask them, what do I need to bring in? They're going to be needing backup documentation as far as, your payroll quarterlies for 2019, anything that they can see that establishes that you have had payroll. And then also, some supporting documentation as far as, what your rent, what your utilities and all that stuff potentially is going to be. So I just wanted to stress these guys are going to be just bombarded this next week. And as much of the application, I have seen the sample one, it is out there. As much of that you can have prepared to take into these guys is going to be best for all of us. Because then they'll be able to push as many of these loans through as quickly and as easily as possible. So I would stress, meet with your accountant, talk to them. They will have most of the documentation if you don't already have it. to be able to take into your banker. So.
We
That's
have
a
another
good point.
question.
And I would say too, one person jokingly said, but to talk about how much we're talking about here, that to say that if they were to be able to open up a business today, they'd open up a bank, because there's going to be so much money made available, and there's going to be these banks are going to be just absolutely crushed with the demand that, to your point, that the more lenders that can be approved will lighten some of that load, I think. But to the broader point of be prepared, because it's not going to be a quick and easy process, because
And-
just simply because of
John, we
the
did
flood.
have a question wondering if these programs are first come, first served.
No, these programs are available to everybody. I mean, they're kind of available till the $454 billion, or till basically the money runs out. But I mean, it's so much money. I don't think there's a belief that the money would run out. But it's not you got to be first in line to get it done. It's just a matter of the sooner you get in, the sooner you get your money.
Right. Thank you. Any other questions?
So I have one quick one. To find out what would be the best option for a sole proprietor, for example, because there's so many things out there and it's all so confusing. And, not to waste our time applying for something and have it be clarified, is that go to our banker with all those questions? Because I feel bad overloading the banker, but I've read so many things in the last 2 days, and we have a sole proprietorship. It's just one individual that's his own business, and we're just wondering what would be the best option for him.
My recommendation would be any combination of your CPA to give Paul can earn a little business here out of this. But I'd say your CPA or your tax lawyer, whomever you're working with. I mean, certainly your lender's a part of that. But your lender is going to be working on the PPP loans and your bank might not be as aware of all the provisions of the EIDL loans, because that's being administered through the SBA, and they may be an SBA lender and there's a connection there, but I don't think there's any perfect one-stop shop. I think check with your CPA, check with the bank, check with your lawyer, whomever kind of that resource is for you, because you're right, you don't want to spend a bunch of time and you want to make sure you're applying for the right program.
I would also just throw out there too, our SBDC out at Nyack. I know Tim's on here. Go talk to Brooke. Those guys are excellent resources for somebody, especially our sole proprietors that may not have an accountant or somebody like that. Go out to the SBDC and talk to those guys. They're going to be able to lead you, guide you, and direct you, especially on the financials, the projections, all that type of stuff. They're an excellent resource. I can't speak highly of them enough. So.
And that's certainly true, and you get so much more from them than just this. So, Paul, thanks for bringing that up. Other questions? We don't have any more questions on the chat. So at this point, I think we'll close the meeting, but thanks everyone. Hang in there, follow instructions, and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.